Welcome to the Just Larsen Show on innovation and leadership. Today I'm excited to have Gaurav Garg. Gaurav, thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
So you've got a pretty exciting background. Will you start with what you do at Wing, and then I want to talk a bit about Sequoia and all the things that got you here.
Yeah, I'm a venture capitalist. We do early stage investing, which is uh, I define in our case as pre-adoption investing, before there are customers, before there are any signals of traction. Most of the venture industry has moved downstream as the amount of money has grown, and very few people are willing to take this kind of risk. Um, and we focus exclusively on B2B companies. We don't do any consumer investing. And it's pretty varied from infrastructure, uh, data infrastructure, applications mostly that are changing the world by using AI. And then a bunch of companies that are, you could think of as bottoms up. I struggle to put a name on it, but it includes marketplaces, it includes crypto tools, it includes developer tools, all these things that are bottoms up adopted. And some of them tend to be tech light, but they're all B2B. And so it's across those sorts of disciplines, pre adoption. Um, and they're on our third fund now. And it's all tech, of course.
That's exciting. And will you correct me here on my stat? On your website, did I see you've got 20 companies went public and 2 have been acquired for over $1 billion?
Yes. That goes back a long time.
Sure. And just, was it 20 had gone public over the $1 billion valuation?
Yes.
And then the 2 acquisitions over the $1 billion.
Yes.
And then, can you talk, well, let's go back to the beginning, building a $500 million a year company even before Sequoia. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah. Do you want me to start on how it started or just talk about the company briefly?
Whatever you want.
Okay. I was offered a number of jobs at companies that eventually became prominent to be one of the first 5 employees in the 95, 96 time frame. Because the web had just exploded, broadband was happening, deregulation had happened, the Cold War was over. There was this, mobile was starting to happen. There was this incredible confluence of factors that led to the first internet bubble. And I had a lot of ideas. And I actually had 2 job offers withdrawn because the founder, after talking to me for a month, said, "You have so many ideas, you should just start your own company." So I did in 1996. It was a company called Redback Networks in the broadband infrastructure space. And it effectively connected broadband users to the back of the internet, something we take for granted today. But the way that people expected to do it then was completely flawed. And we basically invented the idea of edge routers, where you could take a lot of connections and go to the back of the internet. That concept didn't exist. So our timing was perfect. Broadband was starting to happen. Sequoia was the seed investor. And we went from half a dozen slides to about $500 million in revenue in 4 years flat. And it was kind of a crazy ride. It was a lot of fun, highly stressful. I think there were 15 divorces in the first 40 people. I can tell you some funny stories about it as well. But we went public about 2.5 years after we started the company. That's how fast it went. And you could go public with not much revenue because we had such incredible growth rates back then. So it's kind of a wild ride. And at some point, I just decided I didn't want to be in a place where I spent all my time in rooms with 25 people, which is how I ended up at Sequoia. They said, just come over, hang out, do whatever you want. And so I ended up doing that. So that was the first company.
Yeah. And was it 12 years at Sequoia?
Yeah, I was in the building full time for about a decade. And then I served on the boards that I had worked on for another 5, 6 years. I mean, basically until Many of those companies went public, some of them were acquired. So in each case, almost all of them, I worked on them until the end, until there effectively wasn't a company or the company was a year or two post public. So uh, I don't quite remember how I counted, but something like that.
And was there a second company you built from 0 to 500 million?
Yes, I founded a company called Ruckus Wireless. I had this initial idea. This is a story of hubris. Um, I was already at Sequoia. Part of my role, or a big part of my role, was to have new ideas, incubate things, start things, and maybe become an investor over time. And they were right about that because I insisted I was a founder. So I started this company called Ruckus Wireless. It was called something else then. And the idea was to move consumer video around the home using Wi-Fi. And this was 20 plus years ago. It was quite a novelty. We take it for granted today. It was really hard to do. And I found these few engineers. We put about $500,000 into it. I was the CEO. And we kind of got it to work, but no one really cared. And it took 2 years. It was really hard. And then eventually I talked a friend of mine, Selena Lowe, into becoming the CEO. And we had to effectively restart the company. And took the company into moving video around for telecom people that wanted to do video and encroach on the cable company's turf. And eventually, 3, 4 years later, she decided that she actually wanted to just do Wi-Fi for enterprise. So they cash cowed the video business, and that's how it goes. So company went public. It was at around 500 million in revenue. I stayed on the board the whole time, and I was Selena's partner in all of this, along with the two technical founders. And eventually, the company was acquired by Brocade post going public. So quite a journey.
And talking about, the 22 companies over the billion mark, names like Snowflake and Gong. Um, what are kind of your favorite of those stories, or ones that stand out maybe even more than other ones for you?
My favorite stories are the ones of grit and survival and of difficult founders who, over the 10 years I've known them, are just transformed human beings as they've had to deal with the realities of building a business. And you literally don't recognize the person at the end relative to the person that started. And they could have started at 25 or they could have started at 45. It doesn't matter. It's such a gut wrenching experience. And it's that human transformation that I enjoy the most. And actually is what keeps you alive.
Can you give us some examples of that transformation?
Yeah, I have many. We can just talk about Selena Lowe for a second. Selena is a very good friend of mine. I've known her since 1991. I talked her into doing this in 2004. And her entire background was in marketing and a little bit of product management. And nobody on earth would have believed, and she will tell you this, that she would be a CEO. And she took this thing with two people and grew it to 1,500 over a long period of time. She had to change business models twice. He would fight me on many things. It was like a joke that we were like fighting siblings. He hired some CFO person that I utterly disapproved of and fired him in about 4 months on our own. And then we hired somebody who I had worked with 2 times previously. And he joined, and she called me a month into it to say, I've been an executive in companies for 18 years. I had no idea what a CFO really did. Thank you for persuading me to do this. Or another example was when we went from the said consumer video thing or the moving video around the home for telecom to enterprise. I thought that for 5 or 6 years, we had been building a home networking company. And she says, what we actually have is a Wi-Fi technology company, and we have to go where it's best applied. And she said, it's taken me 6 months to figure this out, but I have to change the entire business. And we were at 30 million in revenue. There were a lot of people doing something, and we completely changed. That is really hard to do. We had to lay off half the company, and we did it intentionally. It was not going badly, but we did it intentionally. And it was hard for me to accept. And she literally shouted at me because I was not willing to listen the first time she explained this to me. But that's the just the determination to make to have those decisions, to do it in a considered way, the collaboration that you have with the founder. That's my favorite part. And I have other stories, but that's one example.
Yeah. So, I want to talk about both, doing yourself and observing it as a investor and board member and advisor. Um, can we talk about some of your 0 to billion lessons for entrepreneurs who might be listening today?
The first thing I'd say is every single company I've been involved with in that process, there have been multiple existential moments, like the one I just described. The second thing is it takes 10 years to get to $1 billion in revenue, almost invariably. It's even Google took 6 years. And those are, as we know, extremely rare. The world changes in those 10 years. You go from being really narrow and deep to, as a founder and CEO, having to become really broad and to realize that you are selling to customers, to people, and to investors. And you need time to think because you are the strategist. So you need to spend time evenly across all of those four. You are the chief recruiting officer. You are the chief person raising money. You are the chief thinker, right? And you are needed with customers. So you have to leave time for all of these things. And you go from being really good at one thing to having to develop all of these skills. And what do you need for that? You need a learning mindset. And this is the thing people forget. All founders walk into these things wanting to do everything from first principles. If they don't, they're not going to be great founders. They have to have that belief in themselves and in the logic. But you have to also move to a place where you listen to everybody around you and then make your decision because you have the most context of anybody. So it's all of these things. It's the learning mindset. It's the understanding the environment changes. How do you manage your time? How do you evolve? Um, you're also the person that cares the most. Caring intensely is incredibly important. You take everything personally, but you have to learn how to put on a face where people don't get scared, but are energized and driven by your intensity, as opposed to what sometimes happens. I mean, 25 years ago, whatever it was, I threw a pen at the wall once and the ink splattered all over the wall because I was really frustrated about something. And you have to care that intensely, but learn how to manage that energy and direct it. So the other thing is that's a little scary. I have this belief that you have to insert hierarchy at 7 people. You can have a flat structure at 6, but at 7, you have hierarchy. And I see this in boards. I see this in lots of places. And in fact, I believe that the average white collar manager manages 5 people today. And that's across the entire infrastructure. So it's actually 4. Sorry, 4.5. But what that means is that every time a company grows 4.5, you have to insert another layer of management. And many people cannot scale beyond 2 levels of management. So somebody that was an individual contributor, it's hard for them to scale. Okay, they can be a manager, they can be 1 level up, but to get to the 3rd level up, where you're managing 2 levels behind you, it doesn't happen often. So depending on the velocity of the growth of the company, you have to reboot the management team. And that is a really hard choice to make because people have done well to get you there. You feel like you owe them, but actually they're not going to scale to the next 5x. So how do you identify that? How do you give people enough oxygen that they can grow into the role versus deciding who you can or cannot keep? And those are really hard choices. And we're all human. We're tribal. But those sorts of things really cause lots of problems. And yeah, with scale, it's mostly about managing people and dealing with people. As I said, I was tired of being in rooms of 25 people 80% of my life in a public company, and you have to avoid that fate somehow. Bunch of random things, but I hope that was helpful. I can amplify on anything you want.
Well, let's start with the last one there. Um, so let's say we've got a founder, the business is, they've got such good product market fit. The revenues are climbing fast enough that they're getting to this point where they're having 3 and 4 layers of management, like you're talking about, or more. Um, what kind of a decision tree would you give them, or what kind of questions would you have them ask themselves as they're considering, is this person going to be able to make it, or do they need to be replaced?
It's going to sound a little cold, but it's a little statistical. It's like in our experience, statistically, you are replacing one person every 4 to 6 months. So who are the 2 or 3 people you're most worried about, and why? And what are you going to to uh, track to make a determination on whether you need to make an upgrade? And realize that it's going to take 4 to 6 months to find somebody. So you either need a succession plan from within the building, or you need to start talking to people casually outside without doing a search in case something goes bump in the night. So, for example, for a salesperson, head of sales, you may have the following conundrum. In the beginning, you need somebody that is pretty regional, right? Because you're not managing a big team. You are doing product market fit discovery. It needs to be somebody that really knows how to sell on their own and manage a team of half a dozen people. Eventually, it transitions into an entirely recruiting discipline, eventually transitions into an entire counting discipline. Counting is hard for many people because you have to make really tough choices when you start talking about sales productivity. And that is a place where the person that recruited a lot of great folks that followed that sales leader off a cliff, that's very tribal. But when you get to accounting discipline, you have to decide how to expand based on the numbers, based on changes in sales productivity. And that's a completely different mental mindset. So the tribal leader may not be appropriate for the counting discipline. And, um, where do you take the inspiration that the sales leader has as the chief salesperson in the company, and where does it matter most? And what do you need? Is this a channel business? There's so many factors, but in a fast growing company, very rarely do you have a Chris Degnan that has scaled through so many periods of growth. I don't remember when Chris joined, but even Chris would tell you, I mean, it's amazing that he has scaled this much, and it's a credit. And he's so humble, one of my favorite people. So this is the head of sales at Snowflake. So we would never have expected he could scale to this level. Oh my God, we would never have expected Snowflake would get to this level, right? So that is extremely rare. But that's a very concrete example of factors that would make you make changes along the way. And it's not that the salesperson is a bad person, they're just a fit for a certain scale or a certain model.
Every sentence you say makes me come up with 3 more questions. I got my fingers crossed, trying to remember what questions I. Okay,
Please.
so what I want to go back to is this idea of taking in all the advice from all these people talking on strategy, and then you, who has the most context, has to make the decision. My question is, if you have any guidance of like questions CEOs should be asking themselves when it's like, I feel like there's this balance beam between, if everyone else saw what you saw, they would be the visionary running this company and they would need you, right? And so there's some aspects of like, there's something you see that others don't see. That's why you're in charge. And then there's the other side of the balance beam where it's like sometimes it feels like you have to be bold and make the decision, even though, because you know it's what's supposed to happen, even though everyone else can't see what you see yet. And then there's this other side of like, Other times, you need the humility to realize you're just daydreaming, and that is not in the realm of possibilities, and you need to take advice. And I ha- I'm desperate for advice on how to navigate that balance beam. If you have any thoughts.
It's a really nuanced question. And it starts with um, being bold, having a vision, being intellectually honest, having a learning mindset on the part of the founder. And this notion that the founder is infallible is nonsense. That's not possible. In fact, you have to have a learning mindset and humility. Otherwise, you're not going to evolve. And adaptation is the greatest form of survival. We've seen that real time in the last 2.5 years. So how can you be infallible at the start? It makes no sense. You know, are we all perfect without vaccines? No. We're adapting ourselves. So, so to get to your question, um, building advisors, whether it's on a board, whether it's trusted people within the company, is an art form. And what you want to look for is to fill in the gaps that you have, right? I don't know anything about marketing. Let me find a marketing person to be on the board or an incredible marketeer inside the company. Uh, I don't know anything about finance. I don't know anything about Wall Street, whatever it is. You want to bring people in that can help you with that because they will immediately teach you how to look at the problem, what questions to ask, and broaden your perspective. Great founders are incredible learners, and they will take what you say to them and come back to you within one or two board meetings in a way that you never thought was possible. And it's a thrill for me as a board member. I'm asking them some questions, and they come back to me in this unique way that I've never seen before and add a 90th percentile performance. That's just fantastic. So, as a founder, you want to surround yourself with people, listen, adapt the advice to what you're doing, understand what is completely generic advice versus advice from people that, let me put it another way. As an advisor, if I know 1% of what the founder does, that's really bad. If I know half of what the founder does, then why are they there? So ideally, I should know somewhere like some geometric mean between them, 10 to 20%, so I can contextualize my advice, but then they make the decision, right? And I find that the decisions that founders make, if the person has a good board, people are actually very willing to accept. It may not be exactly what I want, but I actually understand. And uh, it's a question of who's talking to them, all of the voices in the room, and making a decision in the wake of uncertainty that is going to be slightly bold, but you can kind of see the game theory behind how it could work when you look 2 or 3 moves ahead. It's not perfect. It's not 100%. But if you look 2 or 3 moves ahead, you kind of understand the game theory of each of the consequences of those decisions. It's a fairly decent chance it's going to work out. Uh, so other things I'd say is realize at any time, only 2 or 3 things matter in what the company is doing over the next year. How do you identify those and have absolute ruthless focus on them? Most management teams or people cannot focus on more than 3, 4 things at a time. They cannot execute on it. So, you know, something like the iPhone where you had to execute in 16 different dimensions can only be done in a company like that with someone like Steve Jobs who ruled by, fiat. But there are very few people like that. And so, yeah, it's just the focus. It's the um, evaluating the uncertainty, playing it out a few moves, and making the decision.
Well, that really leads me to my next question, and I feel like you've answered it partially already, but I want to see what else you would add to it. It's this idea of, um, it's so common that even the entrepreneurs who are successful can only scale so far, and then the VCs or whoever have to bring in a professional CEO or something like this. When you think about a founder who wants to go all the way, and they want, they want the ultimate learning mindset, and they want to cultivate like that deep humility paired with the boldness you're talking about, and they want to scale themselves to the billion or more. Do you have any thoughts or any recommendations of how to master that level of learning mindset?
It's very human. How do you balance that intensity, the focus with the scale and having perfect people management skills? It's just not possible. So uh, I have this, I got this from uh, one of the bankers, strangely enough, um, who may or may not want to be named. But if you think of a scale of risk taking or product awareness, but I'd say kind of risk taking versus management skills. And it's a 2x2 chart, right? Steve Jobs, extreme risk taker, huge product awareness. Nobody would accuse Steve Jobs of having great EQ and being an incredible manager in the way that we think of a manager. Whereas the CEO of GE, whatever, Jeff Immelt or somebody, most of the time, not Neutron Jack, you would think of being as a great manager. Are there people that are both? That's extremely rare. And I think you have to identify where you are on the spectrum and where you're developing towards, but also understand who you are and build a management team around you to complement you so you have enough of a balance. But it's really hard to take yourself and be able to do both effectively. There's just, and remember, we're not talking about whether you're better at the 50th or 75th percentile. You have to be at the 90th, 99th percentile on both scales. In some cases at 99.9. And that's just really hard. I mean, I think of people um, like maybe Sheryl Sandberg, in her heyday. The way Sheryl would manage it, you just didn't want to disappoint her. So she was demanding without being obnoxious, right? And at least that's what I hear. I don't know her at all, but there's maybe a small number of people that are like that.
Well, okay, then I'm going to change my question. Uh, what if you're more of the Steve Jobs type, and as much as you wish you could be the manager too, and as much as you're trying to work on yourself there, you're honest that you probably need to hire. You probably
Mhm,
need to hire for those holes. Like
mhm.
energy is better spent being the crazy guy with the
Being the
crazy
product guy, being the product
being
person.
being like the intense product person, and you've
Yes,
decided like time is better spent doubling down on that instead of
yes.
it's kind of like the like Michael Jordan didn't make a lot of money playing baseball. Why don't we all figure out what
Mhm,
our basketball is and do that, right?
mhm.
When it comes to filling the holes, especially knowing that it's can be very tough for staff to have this amazing visionary that might be very well respected, that's intense and is not as great at being so um, connected and lovey-dovey with the staff and
Mhm.
and do you have any thoughts for navigating that issue because you need to win the hearts and minds of that staff?
Yeah, hire the right people that are doing most of the lifting. And then you can be the intense and inspirational leader. And when everyone's going to give you a hall pass for having that intensity show up every now and then, because most people want to be led. And if you are pointing the way forward, people will accept the intensity. What gets hard is dealing with it every day and then going to that intense person every day for small little problems. That's really hard. Most problems, there's so many mundane things that managers can do and take off your plate. So your energy is better reserved for what is strategic, where people are actually plunging into uncertainty and want to see that leadership, that inspiration, that intensity. So hiring people, Steve Jobs famously hired Tim Cook, right? As just using the example that we're talking about. And in fact, at that time, if you looked at the management team in Apple, there were a bunch of product people, and then there was a CFO and the marketing guy, and everything else was under Tim Cook. You never saw all those people, right? It just did not look like a normal management team because there were like 4 or 5 product and engineering people in the top 10 that were on the website. And that was a reflection of who Steve was. And I don't know what it's like now, but, and actually, I think phenomenal managers or operational people love working for great founders because they know they have product market fit. They know they have leadership. They know someone who can look around, look through 2 corners, looking into the future. And I think it works really well. I've seen it many times. And I also say one thing, I personally have a lot of difficulty getting rid of founders. Um, I have this rule of thumb, which is if I'm incredibly grumpy for 3 years, it has to be 3 years. Then I go, the CEO goes, or the company goes. And at 2 years, I need to start having the conversation. So I'm not like being intellectually dishonest. I actually start talking to the person. Look, I've been grumpy for a long time. It's been 2 years. I'm not, I mean, this is real. We've watched this for 2 years. Something's got to change. And otherwise, what am I doing here? What's the point? Or frankly, what are you doing here? Or maybe this company doesn't need to exist. And it's not a nice conversation to have, but there are many stakeholders, lots of people have put their lives on hold for it. There are other investors. You just owe it to the whole community of people and investors and customers to not let them down.
I really enjoy that answer, and I'm gonna have this transcribed. Actually, I'm gonna put you in. I'm writing books. I say I'm writing books. I'm having books written. But I think you're gonna be in 2 books. Okay, so
Oh,
I'm
come
doing a
on.
series where I'm transcribing all the episodes of our guests who've done 0 to billion, right? And then it's funny because this is just my interview yesterday. I had a guy named George Molokol on who runs a $7 billion fund in Chicago called the Alcor Fund,
Mhm.
and he's from India, grew up in South India, went to Oxford, is really specialized in doing business across borders. He's in like 135 countries,
Mm,
surprisingly in a lot of different industries,
mm.
oil and gas, food, these different things. And he's like, oh, this works really well in India. So we took it to Indonesia and then to Australia and then to, you know, and I told him like on this show, I'm I get such amazing entrepreneurs and investors from India that I'm going to transcribe all of you guys and have a book called like Indian Geniuses or something. So I'm gonna have to send it to you and get your feedback. I do want to diverge for 1 second. Um, you did you go to UW? Where did you go to university?
No, I went to Washington University in St. Louis.
Oh, okay,
There are
okay,
26 universities in the country with the name Washington in their name, unfortunately. So
okay.
it's a bit of a marketing problem. I'll agree.
Where did you grow up in India?
I grew up in a city called Ahmedabad in Gujarat, and I
And
came
what
to
part of the country
America.
is that?
It's in the West.
Okay. Uh,
It's the uh, birthplace of Mahatma Gandhi and Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was the founder of Pakistan, or at least where he was from, and the current prime minister. But not many people know about it for some reason.
oh, really? Um, I'm interested what advantages you think it gave you to grow up there.
My mother came from a business family. They were quite wealthy. My father was a professor, so I was always the poorest kid in the family. I was a, that's actually true, and I was definitely in the bottom 1/3 of the school that I went to, the high school, which was a Jesuit school. And you just like look around at all of this. When I came to America at age 18, it was not like food was a problem, at all, or we had a refrigerator, but we did not own a TV, we did not own a car. And one of my friends would wear a pair of jeans to school every day. And I asked him, how do you do this and wash them? Nobody had washers and dryers. How do you wash them every day and show up in the morning? He looks at me, he says, I have 3 pairs of jeans. It would have never occurred to me that somebody would have 3 pairs of jeans. Like all my clothes would fit in, like a bag that big. So it was not just that, but it was also seeing all these people around me that kind of really lit a fire under me. That this was that there was a lot to aspire to. That was part one. Part two was my father had a PhD, did his PhD at UC Berkeley, and he was a professor of organizational behavior at the business school. So the conversations around the table were very broad based. And I went to a Jesuit school, as I said, but the education was very broad based in some fashion. And it kind of really instills that constant intellectual curiosity that all of us need to have. And then the third thing was honestly coming to America um, within 3 months, you realize that you're in a system where effort, the learning mindset, um, uh, well, who you are doesn't matter. You know, if you get placed in the right environment, you can really take advantage of it. And I saw that at university, and it certainly is true around here. And perhaps it's become, as we've become more industrialized, it's become a little bit more tribal than it should be. But in general, as you're aware, founders come from all sorts of backgrounds. Many of them speak English badly. I mean, I've been involved with incredible founders who have really bad grammar and heavy accents and that have done really well. And that is a disadvantage in American society, whether or not you like it. But at least, the opportunity does exist if you have uh, the drive and the risk-taking abilities and the education. So all of those things mattered. And and yeah, it's something super personal to me, but we're still here charging the hill.
I love it. I I grew up in Canada and I love Canada and there's great things about Canada. And I think the US is the best country in the world for the same reasons you just said.
Yeah. This is part of the reason I'm still doing early stage investing. That it's an addiction, the charging the hill with great uncertainty and watching these young people grow up. As I said, over 10 years, that's the greatest thrill of all.
I really like that answer. Uh, okay, maybe as we're kind of winding down here, I'm interested. I have so many people on this show, and some people have multi-million dollar businesses, and some of them have $100 million businesses, and some of them have, I had Carl Alomar, they got DigitalOcean to 15 billion, or I had the CEO of $15 billion Trammell Crow on the show. And all these, I get to see these different ranges, and I get to see the mindsets in common between the different ones. And those folks at the very highest levels, you guys say a lot of the same things. You say humility, obsession with the customer's problem, like they never stop working on that product market fit. Like everybody says product market fit. And then those people at your level, they live it. It's like this. They're saying the same thing. They just live it so much harder than the other people I get to interview. When you think about true, genuine product market fit or getting to those kind of levels, what kind of principles would you have for the rest of us on how to just push deeper and like continually refine to better and better product market fit, or just what kind of theories do you have at all about having what you want so awesome people can't get enough of it?
It's experimentation and measurement, right? And I don't have a clear metric for product market fit. Actually, I do. But everything just gets easier. Whatever you're doing just gets easier. So how do you measure that? And um, one way I have of doing it is if you watch the sales productivity curve for whatever effort you're putting into customer acquisition, um, you invest in people or you invest in media or whatever it is, it takes a little bit of time to develop. So there's some sales productivity curve from the time you invest till their returns, right? And if that curve starts inflecting upwards, life's getting easier because for the same amount put in, you're getting more dollars back. If it goes downwards, there's something wrong. The reality is that every stage of company, as you grow, there are periods where it inflects upwards, where it doesn't go up, and then it starts to drop. It's just an inevitable cycle. Every time it starts to drop, you got to figure out, what do I do to make it go back up? And you're running experiments again. So it's a continuous cycle of experimentation to see what to do. Sometimes you run out of oxygen in the way you are selling something to in the channel and the product, etc. So you have to come up with some new method to keep growing the company. So that's another experiment. So for me, it's about experimentation and continuous measurement. And um, the mistake people make is to oversample, to overdo it. They look backwards at revenue. Um, Even these notions of the magic number to me are flawed, because if you can take a new salesperson and they can do $10 million a year in 4 quarters, but zero in the first 2 quarters, what should you do? You should hire like crazy, because they're going to be incredibly productive in 4 quarters. And um, it doesn't matter what the magic number is. But the reality is, if you hire 100 people, you won't get that. So you have to hire a bunch, see what's happening, and then hire more, or you're going to change a few things. So for me, um, um, there are other things with product market fit that are earlier, obviously, which is don't have happy years, have a statistic sampling of at least 20 customers, and eventually 20 customers a quarter. Um, I don't think the first 20 customers are about product market fit uh, at, say, first $2 million, however you want to think about it. It's the 2 million to 20 million that's really about general availability. Can a generic person sell this thing, as opposed to the 3 people that live in the founder's office? And I don't know. I mean, those are very maybe sales oriented answers, but
I like them. I I mean, I feel like entrepreneurship is a lot about sales. So,
and listening to the customer, exactly as you said, product market fit.
well, listen, we've covered a lot of subjects here. Well, let's start with this. If people want to find out more about Wing, if they want to connect with you, if they want to find out about portfolio companies, where should we send people online?
We have a website, wing.vc, and honestly, people can just reach out to me as well. So
Just on
you have
LinkedIn,
my
or
email
where's
address.
best?
Yeah, LinkedIn would be great, and yeah, LinkedIn would be great.
Okay, great. Um, well, we covered a lot of subjects here. What's something we didn't cover that you'd like to leave with?
We enjoy, and I enjoy uh, helping people do their best work. And I hope that came through in all of this. And um, we're not arrogant enough to believe, or we are humble enough to know that the founder is driving the bus. We are humble enough to realize that what they've created has real value. But what we can help them do is to increase the value by 10x through by helping them bring people on, by adding perspective, by being humble ourselves. Um, and yeah, as I said, just what we enjoy most is having people make the best of their potential. That's the greatest thrill of all.
Well, maybe to close then, let's repeat what we started off with. Who is the ideal founder that you want to hear from, that you want inquiring at VC for potential funding?
Wow.
B2B,
There's so many ways to succeed.
pre-acquisition. Sure. But I'm
Yeah.
saying,
So
what's the
yeah. What
mandate?
are the characteristics? Pre-adoption, giant markets, in interesting margin structure. Um, we love founders that are good at the narrative to customers, to people, and to investors. Just makes our lives a lot easier, and they're much more likely to succeed. We are interested in uh, um, data infrastructure. We're interested in AI applications, and we're also interested in product-led growth and bottoms-up companies that are doing some significant disruption. So people in all of those areas.
Ah, that's great. Well, thanks again for doing this.
Thank you. What a pleasure.
Yeah. Okay. Bye, everyone.